Right, hello. Well, I'm going to provide you now with a few tips on things that I would do if you've got to choose a new corporate service provider, or if indeed you've got to choose a corporate service provider for the first time. So here they are. Okay, number one, firstly, test their knowledge. Make sure that whoever you're choosing knows what they're talking about. Ask them some technical questions, get them to explain, for example, the difference between the Isle of Man Companies Act 2006 and the Isle of Man Companies Act 1931 to 2004. If they can't explain those to you, then clearly they don't know what they're talking about, so move on. Next thing, ask them about the professional directors. Ask who are going to be the professional directors. If you're only going to be dealing with an administrator and you've no contact with the directors themselves, I would say move on. The directors are the people who can bind the company, who actually have ultimate control of your assets, who are actually you need to trust, and if you don't have contact with them, then that is not going to be a good thing. Thirdly, ask to see the terms of business. Every corporate service provider in the Isle of Man must have terms of business in a written form with the client company they're administering, which covers things like the agreement over fees, the provision for terminating the services, so on and so forth. Also, it will have indemnities in it too. Make sure you read it, check it. If you don't like any of the terms in there, go back to the corporate service provider, ask them if they'll change it. Perhaps they will. Fourthly, time recording, very important. Make sure that your corporate service provider does not have recovery targets for their administrators which work to your disadvantage. By that I mean, if they are going to be charging 8 hours a day and they're only at work for 7.5 hours, clearly they're going to be overcharging the client, and that probably includes you. Much better to go for a fixed fee, or indeed to ask for the bills monthly, in which case it's much easier to challenge them at the time. Next one, accountability. If your structure has been put together under the advice of a tax advisor, make sure that the corporate service provider will agree to take responsibility for the implementation of the structure under those terms. If they don't, and if it's not administered correctly, then the tax advisor will escape liability because it hasn't been put together in the way in which he said it should have been, and the corporate service provider won't have any liability because they didn't say that they would do it in accordance with those terms. Check it, make sure that happens. Finally, transfer. If you want to transfer the structure to another provider, this is normally a very awkward thing to do. So make sure that you have agreement in advance of how that's going to be dealt with, and make sure you have it in writing. Make sure you know what the fees are going to be. For example, perhaps get an agreement that an incoming provider will do the paperwork and the outgoing provider will not charge anything on that basis. You'll find at the beginning of a relationship that it's quite easy to get them to agree to the terms that you like, and as I say, make sure you get those in writing. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful.